Blender 4.5 comes with a lot of new features, but one of the features that really stands out is the Set Mesh Normal node. And the cool thing about this node is that it allows you to manually change the normal direction of any face of a mesh. But I hear you thinking, why is this such a cool and important feature? Well, with this technique we are capable of seamlessly merging objects together without the need of remeshing it all together. And this is exactly what we are going to look at in this video. And today I want to do something different, because normally we would start off from scratch in my videos, but today I really want to focus on the new Set Mesh Normal node. So I pre-created this Blender file over here, which consists of a screaming head which has all these strings going on over here. So this Blender file, you can find it in the link in the description, download that and then we can get started. So as I already said, I created these strings from scratch. So you would think, okay, but what is the actual goal of this video then? Well, if we have a look, you see that the strings are not really connected to the head in a good way, right? It's quite ugly and harsh. And our goal in this tutorial is to make it that these strings are going to be smoothly integrated with the head. But before we do that, I want to give you a quick overview of what the geometry node setup looks like. So let's split our screen in half like this, and let's go into the geometry node editor. And you see, okay, it looks like this. It's not a lot, but it can still be overwhelming. So let me go over it one by one. But before I do that, I'm going to turn off these nodes. You don't have to do this, but I will do this. So don't you worry, later I will set it back on the original things. But okay, if we start like this, let's start over here. The group input, that's basically the head. And then we take the head and we distribute a lot of points on it. For the selection, I created a vertex group so that I can say, okay, where should be points and where not. If you want to preview this vertex group, you can go into edit mode for the object, go over here into the object data properties. And if you then do select, then you see what vertices I selected to not have points. Because with this map range node, I reverse the selection so that it's easier to decide where are points and where not. Then we take these points and we put them in a repeat zone. And this repeat zone basically just simulates the points to go into that direction. And for now, I'm actually going to set the density on 4 so that my computer is not going to lag. So as I was saying, this repeat zone is simulating it. However, now we have it that we just see the points floating, and that's not what we want. What we want is that the points are leaving a trail of points, so to say, which we can then convert into a curve. And to create that trail of points, I actually created a second geometry node socket over here. And what this does is each iteration of the repeat zone, we join the single point with the points that came before. And that looks like this then. Okay, I'm going to set the iteration back on 40 for now. And now let me show you quickly how it's actually simulating it to go in this way. Well, the simulation is based on this velocity vector over here. And this velocity vector updates each iteration. So let me quickly turn these all off so that we can go over it. So first of all, each iteration we are adding a direction to the points with this add node over here. And the way you can interpret this is that each iteration over the y-axis, it goes minus 0.01. And each iteration over the z-axis, it goes 0.002 up, which makes this shape, of course. However, I thought this was a bit too much of a straight line. So with these nodes, we are adding in some noise to it. However, then we also see that the trails are going inside the head. And that's not really what we want. Basically, what I want is that instead of it going like this, I want the points to go like this, that they kind of avoid the head. And exactly that we do with these nodes over here. So let me turn this on again. Then you see that works. And the way you can interpret these nodes is that each iteration, we first determine the distance from one point to the faces of the head. And then we can say, okay, if the point is too close to the face, then it should be pushed by the normal of that face. And the normal of the nearest face is determined with these nodes. So that's how the points are simulated. However, now the points are still points and they are not connected with each other. So if we go after the repeat zone, you see we have a points to curves node. And then you see all the points are converted to a curve. We do need the ID node because otherwise this node wants to connect every single point with each other. And that's not really good. We only want to have the points that belong to each other, so connect the ID with it. And then with the curve to mesh node, we add some thickness to the curves. And also a cool new feature in Blender 4.5 is the scaling socket in the curve to mesh. And this scaling socket is basically replacing the oh so beloved set curve radius node. So that's good. And over here you see that we use a spline parameter so that we can say, okay, over here it should be thick and at the end it should be very thin. However, I also wanted to have some randomization in this thickness. So with a random value for each spline, we can do that like this. Okay, cool. Now that you kind of have an overview of how this geometry nodes works, let's start working on our goal to make this part go smoothly inside of the head. And we're going to do this in 2 steps. The first step is to actually manually move this part inside of the head. And then the second step is to use the set mesh normal node. But we'll get to that. Let's first move this inside. And we're going to do that between the points to curves and the curve to mesh. So let's move that over here to make some space. And we want to move the points on the curves. So we're going to use a set position node. And what we basically want is that these points are moving towards the normal of the face that they were distributed on, so that they go like this. And if we go to the beginning of our geometry nodes, then you will see that the points that we distributed on the face of the head also have a normal direction. And this normal direction is exactly what we want to use to move this in that direction. So this normal socket, we want to drag that all the way over here to our set position node into the offset. Then you see, yeah, that doesn't really work yet. It's now going all the way over there outwards, but we want it to go inwards. So let's do Shift A and add in a vector math node, which we set on scale. And then you will see that we can scale it down. And at some point, if you set it on 0, then it's just the original. But if you go minus, then you see that it goes inwards. Just goes so much inwards that it is good for every single thing, of course. And also, if you want to have a bit more of an overview in your geometry nodes by not having this line going all the way through it, you can hold down Shift and right click and make a joint over here. And this joint you can then move over here, for example, and over here make another joint so that you have more of an overview. And then you see the strings are going inside the head. However, you see that it is still quite a harsh line that goes over here, like a hard edge that goes from string to head. And that we want to solve. This we want to make smooth, and that we can do with the set mesh normal node. So if we put these back over here, because we want to do that on the mesh, so we're going to do the set mesh normal node right over there. And at first the set mesh normal is on sharpness, and what this does is, yeah, you can set the edges sharp or the faces sharp, but to be honest, I don't really think you're going to use this that much. What we want to have is that we can freely change the normal of a face, so we're going to set this on free. And then we see we have this custom normal socket over here, which is perfect because you see this is a vector and we can change it in any way that we like. And in order to make this look smooth, we first need to determine what is the normal of the closest face from string to mesh. And to do this, we're going to take the group input because we need the mesh of the face. And if you want to have information of the closest face of this mesh, you can do a sample nearest surface node. Connect that like so. And from each face, we want to have the normal direction of it. So let's do a normal node and let's set the sample nearest surface on vector because the normal direction is a vector. And now this output is for each face on the string, the normal of the closest face of this mesh. And if we put this into the custom normals, then you see, okay, that already starts doing something. Well, the good thing is it is smoothly going inside of it. That's good, but the rest of the string is not really looking good. So basically what we're doing now is we're now doing this for the entire string, but we only want to change the normal for the faces that are close to the mesh. So the faces that are kind of over here, but not for these, for example. So we need to determine the distance from each face to over here. So for that, we're going to use a geometry proximity node, set that like so. And then you see that we have the distance from each point to this point. So you see the brighter it is, the further away it is. And this distance value is going to act as some kind of mask, which is going to determine, okay, where should the normal be changed and where should it stay the same normal. So basically we want that the brighter parts are going to stay the same and the darker parts should change to the normal of the closest face. And to do this, we're going to need a mix vector node. And let's set as vector A, we want to set the sample near a surface. And as vector B, we want to set the original normal of each face. And then as the vector, we of course want to set the distance like this. And then if we put the mix node into the curve normal and we remove the viewer node for now, then you see, okay, that kind of starts working, but not completely yet. You do see that over here it looks good again. The normals look fine, but I think the fading is a bit too big at the moment. So what we're going to do is make a little bit more space, and we want to remap the distance value over here. So if we do a map range node, and let me also preview this one, and if we make the from max value lower, then you see we make the fade not go from here to here, but more from here to here, for example, which is way better. Let us set this on 0.07 or something like that. And now let's see what that looks like. Oh yes, look at how this is going very smoothly inside of it. And you see that it literally works for all of them. However, you see some of them are still a little bit harsh. And we can really see why this is happening when we go into wireframe mode, because this has everything to do with the geometry of the strings. Because looking at just this one, for example, we see that horizontally we do have enough geometry. However, if we go vertically, we do not really have enough geometry. And that results that we have these hard edges still, because the normal is all the same over here, for example. So we want to add more geometry, and that we can simply do by resampling this curve over here. So if we make a bit more space over here, we can do a resample curve node. Let's set this on length. And then if we set the length on 0.01, we now have each 0.01 meters a new cut over here in our mesh, which will look a lot better, as you can see, before, and this is after. And this is especially going to look pretty cool if we crack up the density of the distribute points on faces over here. So let's set this on 50, for example, and then you see that looks like this, and you see that every single string is going very smoothly inside of the head, and I think this is just phenomenal. So the next step would be, it's going smooth, but can we also make the texture go smooth? Because what if we want to have the strings to be a different color than the head, for example? Can we still make it smooth like this? Well, that we're going to look at in a second, but first I want to talk to you about something else, because I can completely understand if you're looking at these nodes that you're thinking, oh my god, what is all of this? I have no idea what I'm looking at. How am I ever going to learn all these nodes? I wish there was just some place in which I can just learn every single node in geometry nodes in a very easy and chill way. Well, then I have good news for you, because I released the Big Notebook. It's a book that explains every single node in geometry nodes in a very easy and chill way. And the book starts from the very basics, and over the course of 200 pages, it goes to more advanced techniques. The book is available on my Gumroad, and it has been fully upgraded to Blender 4.5, so every new node has been added in. And also, if you use the code NORMAL, you will get 25% off of your purchase. So if you want to expand your knowledge in geometry nodes, I recommend getting this book today. And with that being said, let's continue the tutorial. Okay, before we get into the texturing part, I'm going to put the density a bit lower again, so that we can work a little bit more efficient with our computer power. So for the texturing, we could of course go into material preview mode, but I figured that it would be a lot better to just go straight into render view mode. So if you click on render view mode, and let's turn on cycles. So let's go into render properties, EV to cycles. And if you have a graphics card, always turn on your GPU, of course. And you also see that I already provided you with an HDRI so that we have straight up nice lighting. However, what I do want to do is set the background to transparent. So let's go into render properties, and let's go under film, and let's set this on transparent. That looks a bit better. Let's create a material for this head. So let's split our screen in half like so, and let's set this to the shader editor, and let's click on new, and let's call this material head or something like that. And then you see if you change the base color, you see that the base color only changes for the head and not for the strings. And the reason for that is because the head is actually the original mesh, so that's not a problem. But the strings are created in geometry nodes, so we need to assign the material inside of geometry nodes. So if we do a set material node and set the material on head, and then you see that works perfectly fine. Okay, first thing that I want to show you is how to create different colors for the strings and the head, because over here that's going to be quite hard. What we want to do is we want to create a mask, and this mask we're going to create in geometry nodes and then transfer to the shader editor. And this mask we actually already have created that, because that's the output of this map range node over here. So if we do a store named attribute node, which we set on mask, and then put the map range into the mask, and then if we go into the shader editor, we can do an attribute node, which we also set on mask, of course. And then if you put the color into the base color, then you see the head is black and the strings are white. You do see that it is not perfectly smooth over here. Well, let's see what will happen if we put the to min value to a low number like 0.005. Then you see that works a lot better. Then it's actually smooth. So now to make any color for the face or the strings, we can do a mix color node, and as the vector we do the mask, of course. Then we can set the face on any color that you like for example a bit let's just put it on black for now. And let's set the B value on red so that we have some red strings. I think that will look quite cool, to be honest. Yeah, look, that's very, very, very cool. Let's set the string count a little bit higher, right? So let's set it on 20 or something like that. I think that will make the tutorial content look a little bit cooler, right? So if we put it like this, yeah, that looks a lot better. While playing around with making a material for this, I also figured that this effect will look even cooler if we add some noise bump to it, so that the material is not so smooth, right? So if we add a noise texture, and let's do Ctrl-Shift-Click on it to preview it, and we also do Ctrl-T to add in a texture coordinate and a mapping node. If we then set this on object, I think it's mapped a little bit better onto the mesh. We can set the scaling a lot higher, like so, for example. And then if we use a bump node, we can set the noise texture as the height. That will look very cool, I think. So if we put the normal into the normal of the principal BSDF, then you see, oh, that looks quite cool, I think. And also, if we add even more strings to this, then you see, okay, it looks good, but we can make it look even cooler because the strings are touching each other over here, but there are no contact shadows or something like that. So to make this, if we do an ambient occlusion node and preview this, you see we have all these contact shadows, and that looks really cool. And to combine this with the base color, we can do a mix color node and set this on multiply. And we want to multiply the color with the ambient occlusion, and then that will look like so. For example, if we connect the principal BSDF again, ooh, like this is before and this is after. It's way better, way better. And actually we can also have this mask over here control the roughness of the principal BSDF. So if we make a little bit more space and we put the color into the roughness, then you see, okay, the head is very reflective and the strings are totally not reflective. If you do a map range node, we can actually change the roughness for the strings and the head separately. So the head is the to min value and the strings are the to max value, because 0 is black and 1 is white, as you can see. If we set the to min value on 0.5, for example, the head will get a roughness of 0.5 and it looks a bit more like this, like before. And then we can make the to max value lower so that the strings are a bit more shiny. And I think that looks quite cool. Let's set the to min value for the head a bit higher. Maybe this one a bit higher too. I think the thing that we've created now is already quite a cool sculpture, to be honest. However, at the moment, we are just using procedural textures. But what if you want to merge two objects from which one object has a material which is dependent on image textures and an UVmap? Well, let's have a look how we can fix that. But first, we're going to give this head a material which is based on image textures. So let's set the density of the points on 4 again. And then let's get started by adding in a principal BSDF right over here. And let's do Ctrl-Shift-Click to preview it. And the material I'm going to assign to this is going to be this rock material. You can find it in the link in the description. You can download that and then we can import it into Blender by clicking on the principal BSDF. And then to import all those images at once, we can do Ctrl-Shift-T and then search for the material that you want to use. And then let's import the roughness, the normal GL and the color to it. So let's do principal texture setup and then you see that works perfectly fine. Oh, and by the way, this Ctrl-Shift-T technique, that's only possible if you have the Node Wrangler add-on. So definitely go to edit and then preferences and then search for the Node Wrangler add-on and enable it. Okay, you see that the texture is a little bit stretching. So let's set in the mapping node over here, the y-axis a little bit higher to like 3 or something like that, so that it looks a little bit better. Okay, you see that at the moment, these textures are mapped with the UV map of that object. And let me quickly show you what that UV map looks like. It looks like this, but that's not really that important. But you see that on the strings, yeah, the texture is not really working. And the simplest reason for this is that the strings do not have a UV map at all, because we created those in geometry nodes. So what we basically want, we want to create a new UV map for these strings, but this UV map should be dependent on the UV map of this face, so that the texture still goes smoothly over into the next object. And to do this, we're going to do that, of course, in geometry nodes. So to create a new UV map for these strings, we want to do a store named attribute node, which we set from float to vector because the UV map is a vector. And let's name this UV new. And this value, we want that for each point, we want that to be the UV value of the closest point on the mesh over here. So basically, we're going to do the same thing as we do over here with the sample nearest surface, but instead of the normal, we want to take the UV map of each face. If we take this sample nearest surface and press Shift D to put it over here, we can also take this group input and Shift D it right over there and put it into the mesh. And to get the UV map of this mesh into geometry nodes, we can do a named attribute node, which we set on UV map. And the way that I know that this is the UV map of the face is if you click on the object, you can go into the object data properties over here. And then you see under UV maps, that's the name of the UV map that I showed you earlier. So let's connect this over here. Now we can put this part into the UV new. And then you see, yeah, that doesn't really work. And that's quite logical, to be honest, because this attribute, we are not using that at all in our shader editor. So if we do an attribute node in the shader editor, we can name this UV new and then connect the vector into the mapping node. Then you see it already starts doing something, but now it's for the head, it is gone. And the reason for that is because the head doesn't know a UV new or something like that. And the simplest way to fix this is to take this store named attribute node, Shift D it and put it over here so that we're creating a UV new attribute for the face too. And then just put the original UV map of the face into that, and then that works perfectly fine. And it works so well that, as you can see over here, the texture is smoothly going from the head to the strings. And if you still want that the strings are the red color, for example, then we can actually mix these two principal BSDFs together by holding down Ctrl and Shift and then right click these two nodes, and then it will automatically add in a mix shader node. And then this vector should be the mask that we created earlier this tutorial. So let's do Shift D to put that over here, and let's put the color into the vector, and then you see it's reversed, which is not what we want. So if you take this socket, we want to switch it. So if you take it, hold down Alt, you can switch it with this one. Let's change the color of the face a little bit with an hue saturation value node right over here. And let's set the value on 0.1, for example, so that it becomes a lot darker, but it does look quite cool, I think. And then if we press Ctrl S to save our file and we go over here into the density again and we make it 50, then I think we have created quite a cool creature, especially especially since this smoothing effect is working so well, and I love it so much. And of course, from the introduction video, you saw that you can apply this merging technique in a lot of different ways so that you can create cool looking scenes that were quite hard to create before, but are easy with the set mesh normal node. And that already brings us to the end of this tutorial. So I hope you liked this video again, and if you did, please give this video a thumbs up, comment down below if you have any questions, and if you don't want to miss out on any future videos, I recommend subscribing to the channel. And also be sure to check out the big notebook by going into the link in the description to get 25% off your purchase. And with that being said, I see you in the next one.